Greetings and hello to everyone. This is the Business of Betting podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today is episode 19, and we have professional punter and jockey manager John Walter joining the podcast. John takes us inside his time at world-leading betting operation Humbleton, led by the renowned Zeljko Ranogajec. John talks about what it is like to be a jockey manager, some tips and tools for punters, and racing as an industry and the wagering product. As always, you can find us at businessofbetting.com or at bettingpod on Twitter. Please fire in any questions or feedback and potential guests you would like to hear from. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy my chat with John Walter. Today I'm joined by John Walter. John, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me, mate. There's a pretty intimidating bunch of people gone before me, so hopefully I can do it some justice.
No, you certainly sit very comfortably among them. As we get started here, do you want to go through a little bit about your background and how you got involved with the Australian racing industry and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, I'll try. It's a bit of a different one to most, I guess. Pretty simple. Had a bit of a father who was a hobby punter and sort of probably got me into the bug of it and mixed that up with I was a mad keen golfer growing up and the guys I used to play with were one was a bookie and the other keen punters and they sort of dragged me out from a youngish age, I guess 15, 16 out to the races and that was it. Sort of grew from there, and once I got to a legal betting age, I became keener and keener, and I probably didn't miss a race meeting for about 5 years at one stage. I was going country, provincial, everywhere around New South Wales, trying to learn from people that I could. I went and did some work experience sort of in stables and with a couple of leading trainers in Sydney to try and learn more of that side. I got tied up in the breeding side of it and learned off a guy who was a key person for matching up mares with stallions and tried to learn about the size. I just got fully immersed in the industry, probably from 18 to 25, just going racetracks, learning what I could. The golf sort of went by the wayside, and it wasn't until I was punting for a few people and doing things, but it wasn't until I went to work for Humbleton for Zeljko's company in Sydney that I had any real formal training. It was more just on the job learning bits and pieces, and it sort of that what their formal training combined with what I'd learned off some eccentric people along the way is kind of what bound everything together for me, and was a really strong turning point. And I spent a couple of years there. Their training was incredible. Sort of 3 to 6 months nearly it took for 4 of us that went through the system together it's all pretty much common sense, but the way it sort of sticks with you and all does make sense and folds in with everything was incredible for me. And the couple of years that I spent there was totally invaluable, even though I never got to a high level in their company. I was only a video watcher and a pace and bias sort of person, but it was still invaluable. And then I headed from the punting side of things and went and worked for a corporate bookmaker in Sydney and learnt the bookmaking side of things. So I've kind of went full circle. I actually started out working as a penciler sort of thing with a bookmaker and ended up back there, ended up running risk management for a corporate for 2 or 3 years. And that kind of finished off my training, I guess you could say. Like I'd got to learn nearly every part of the industry in small parts, and when I left there, that was kind of when I was ready to do my own thing and started my own company, providing information to trainers and owners and jockeys and the general public, and that's kind of moved to where I am today. And only recently I've started to become a jockey agent as well, which is really fulfilling and good fun, working with a couple of really, really good guys who are obviously good jockeys as well. So it's been a long 15 years, but very enjoyable. Probably a little bit longer now, but really enjoyable.
You certainly do touch on almost every aspect of the industry. So can you take us inside a little bit with your work at Humbleton? I don't want to sort of dig too deep and give away too much, but how was that? You mentioned the formal training, but when you're talking about the actual work, do they compartmentalize absolutely everything there, and it's efficient operation in regards to their form operation and then on the betting side as well?
Yeah, so what I was exposed to, as you say, they compartmentalise pretty much all of it to try and keep I don't think I understand the higher you get up, the more you're exposed, but the people at the grunt level, which is basically where I was, never got to see behind the curtain or whatever you want to say. There was plenty of speculation, and obviously you heard things and dealt with people who were at a higher level, so you did hear and see a lot. But I reckon there was probably at least 30 to 40 people working in the office I was in full time. And I was in the first office that was basically when everyone was working from home, being sent CDs and doing things from their own homes. Before that, we moved into this office, and it was not just good fun, but it was really you could I think the learning environment from their point of view was really strong, because if you needed to ask questions or you were always dealing with people talking about races, you were always learning and improving. And I'd say that their system was evolved from just having everyone in the same office. So I'd say, from a consistency, and they didn't really want you to have an opinion. They wanted you to have their opinion, which is fine. They were paying for that, and that's basically all you did at the level I was at. And then would sort of obviously move to a person above me who would collate the previous information, and then I assume they bet off it. So I honestly didn't get to see, as you say, sort of behind the curtain like a lot of people have. But from where I did see it, it was unlike anything I'd ever heard of or seen since. It was incredible, the amount of money being spent on gathering information to move to another level, and then there were more people again before. So the amount of money they were spending on this information that they were collating was incredible. Just to imagine how much they must have to win to break square, let alone to make the huge profits they obviously have over the years.
So is there such thing as a secret sauce for an operation like that, or is it just really, really hard work, a lot of information gathering, a lot of, I guess, smart people together, and then, I guess, a lot of precision and timing and, from the operations side, just being, ruthless when it comes to every single part that goes into making a bet, and because of that, over time, they were just going to grind it out? Is that the secret sauce, or is there something else that makes them so successful? Because I know around the world there's a lot of iconic bettors, and a lot of things they're doing are pretty secret, and I guess that's sort of the mythology around those types of people. But is it in general that they just work really, really hard, and they have a lot of very smart people, and they do the right things more often than not?
I think they worked it out very, very early, some sort of key components to racing, which are the things that have kind of stuck and helped with me, just things like bias, things that they'd observed. So there were obviously some very talented people early in the piece that were putting systems together to find gaps in the market that were being underplayed and overplayed, and they just exploited those. And on top of the huge commission deals that were available through tote betting, I think that allowed them to be probably the pioneers in really going wide with their techniques. So covering as much racing as possible, reviewing as many races and betting on as many races as possible, turning over huge amounts of money, and the rebates that they were receiving would just that was the high turnover, low margin model that they obviously ran. I remember early in the piece, I can't remember who told me, they said basically if the information we provide breaks square, we've got a job for life. So it was,
wow.
Kind of interesting. Everyone thinks, we've got to be really good. So what they had developed was something that could provide the most turnover across the most markets, and obviously break square or better, and then their commissions were just through the roof, and that's what turned them into what they were. So it's, that this probably you could perfect the model, which is like someone like me, I guess, tries to do, take the best of what they've got, add your little personal touches on your small areas, and that's how you can be you can win more money on turnover than they would, but they're going to turn over, 1,000 more times than I could ever dream of. So yeah, it's an incredible big machine that just churns out basically, a break square or slightly better model. And so I wouldn't say it's a precision model. It's just, that's what it is, like just a big factory that churns out bets. And it was, obviously, they found markets all over the world that it was they could adapt to and where they could get their rebates, and that was it.
So what percentage market are they working in general then? I don't need specifics, but in general, anyone who's having a bet on the weekend are probably looking at, whether it's sports, they're looking at 110% market, or other racing markets where it's probably higher or lower depending on the situation. But are they working in, 102% markets quite often, given the rebates?
I wouldn't say. I'd say they're working in. Say you're looking in Japan and things. I think their takeouts are like 125 or something, but you can get rebates sort of up to 15. I think they were getting. So even if you say it's like they would be working in 110% markets, I'd say pretty generally, maybe less in other areas like Australia. I think we're about 118. They were getting 10. So it's still a pretty tough market they're working in. So I guess they have to be more profitable, obviously, in the areas where they're taking the less, and they're obviously playing in Betfair and things like that as well in 100% markets, but not getting the rebate. So it's they obviously do have an edge. It's just a matter of whether it's covering the rebates or not after it. So it's I don't think they bet that much with like corporates and things over the years. Obviously, they have to adapt like everyone with the totes shrinking and things happening. But I think they made most of their money out of totes, which are obviously a bit higher percentage than any fixed odds or sports markets available.
Yeah. Oh, well, when you think about sports betting, I think the break even is 52.4% if you're looking at about 110% market. So you don't have to be too far over the 50% mark to get out alive. And if you're talking about some of the mammoth turnover numbers that you can imagine with an operation like that, betting around the world every day, in almost every race probably, then it adds up pretty quickly.
Absolutely, and we're talking here like we used to cover dogs, trots, and we're talking trots all around the world, dogs all around the world, horses all around the world. So it's literally just a machine that's churning turnover 24 hours, 7 days a week.
So what happens if they have a day off or a week off, or something happens and that operation ceases? Does someone in that standing and position have an impact on the general market or not?
Well, you would have to say yes, and I do remember at a time there when the tax issue sort of came about, when they were sort of under investigation or whatever you want to call it, and the leaders or the shareholders were slapped with big bills. And I think Zeljko moved overseas for a time, and it was like rumoured that he'd pulled out of Betfair here, the whole company had pulled out of Betfair and the landscape, and prices sort of became a lot more volatile. You would say Betfair was a very good guide, when he was around and big players were playing into the market, and then all of a sudden he dropped out and no one was getting their leads anymore. So a lot of punters just were betting simply off his leads. The corporates were running off his leads on Betfair. So the market was a little bit in disarray, and I'm not sure whether he's stepped back in or there's other big syndicates like I think there's a Dr. Nick in Australia now who dictate those markets late and have stepped in and corrected it. But it's definitely not the same as it was, say, 10 years ago when he was a huge player here.
Interesting. So you're a Jockeys agent. What portion of your day or week does that take up, as opposed to your doing the form and betting and other aspects of your, I guess, average week? It's
interesting. When I was first, I was good friends with. I look after two jockeys, one Josh Parr and Tim Clark, and I was sort of friends with them well before this came about. And we used to just talk about racing a lot, and they could tell that I was passionate and half knew what I was talking about. So they would always, we'd have good time talking about racing because they both love the industry. And it came about, Josh had an injury and asked me if I'd at least have a try at it because he just wanted to change. And I said, I don't know if I'll be any good. I don't know if I'll have the time, but we'll see how we go. And really, it kind of folds in because I'm always looking for, horses to follow reviewing meetings. And basically that really fits in with what they need, the right horses to try and target to get on in upcoming meetings. And that doesn't really take any more time for me. So apart from, a few phone calls and text messages here or there. So it's only really time consuming on days where there's acceptances come out and trial acceptance, things that, when I've got a lot of inbound calls coming, that's the only time it's really, time consuming for me, above and beyond what I'd normally be doing. So apart from when I'm talking to them about racing or compiling, I'll always look at the races they're in anyway. So unless they go interstate or something, there's no real difference in time for me, and I find it really enjoyable. So whatever extra time, it doesn't really feel like it to me anyway. It's good fun.
So I don't think I've ever heard from a jockey's agent before. Is it a game of chess and you're calling different trainers and trying to put them on certain horses in certain times because you give them a better chance than the market, or are you just taking inbound calls every day and every week and then, picking the best of the options that are available?
So it is a balancing act, and you're obviously trying to keep everyone as happy as possible too. That's the key is to build solid relationships, and you don't want to jeopardize one for the other if you can possibly avoid it. And say like Tim, for argument's sake, he's got a couple of key stables, Les Bridge in Sydney, and Gay Waterhouse is really supportive of him, Gerald Ryan. So these are the stables we try and be more in touch with to make sure that we're looking after their needs. And then I'm looking for things to slot around them a lot of the time to try and, obviously the most positive outcome for the jockey, so the best horses possible. But you have to sort of manage the relationships as well. So sometimes you might take a ride that is not the best option, but it's the best option long term. You might take a ride that's not going to be good today, but 2 or 3 starts down the track, it's a horse that you want to be on. So it's a real balancing act all the time. You're not always on the horses you think can win the races today, but there's usually a reason why you want to be on that. And then you'll pick up half a dozen races a week of just someone calling in and saying, is he available? Yes, and filling the book sort of thing. So not to say they're bad rides, but you're basically just taking what comes. Yeah. So it is a bit like a chess game, as you kind of say. It's a balancing act, and you can't keep everyone happy all the time, and you are going to miss good opportunities, but hopefully it all balances out in the end.
Interesting. So you mentioned earlier you're involved in the breeding side a little bit. How do you use that to your advantage, whether it be from the form perspective or the betting perspective? Because I would imagine a lot of everyday punters take absolutely no notice of it, or if they do, it's this is this is Lonhro, or this is in Costa del Lago. That's a good sire that's going to win, sort of stuff. How can you use it to your advantage?
So the reason why I kind of got into it, I was lucky enough to be friends with a few people who owned some studs and things, and just kind of asked if I could tag along, and then went to some stallion shows. And I just, we always had whether it be mythological or however you believe, things like wet track sires always pay, this horse performs and its, progeny perform well on wet tracks. And I wanted to investigate that a bit more and understand why different sires may throw different characteristics into their progeny that would suit those sort of things. And I really, to be honest, never found anything from that point of view. What I did definitely find is that certain horses throw definite characteristics through their lines, and it's usually mental. I find that certain horses throw horses that are highly strung, that can be hard racing, hard to manage. So that was probably the best form part that I found. And what I found since is that certain families that are strong continue to be strong. So I don't think it's anything of the sire or the mare. It seems to be a combination of the two, and there is slight edges in breeding for me, but I really think it's overplayed by the market, and it's not a big edge. It was probably the time least best spent of all the things I've done, to be honest, but it was eye-opening and interesting to have a look at that side of the business. But it's probably at the end of the day, you're better off having a look at the horse itself and judging it on its own merit rather than its family, who its mother and father is at the end of the day.
Yeah. So when you're looking at a market on a race day, are you targeting a certain range in the market? Are you looking at the favourite end, or are you looking at more long shots? How do you approach a race, or is it individual to the individual race?
It's definitely individual, and I would say that I don't really have a range already. I don't look for that sort of thing. I have to change. It's probably more to do with the marketplace than anything that I have to move towards the more favoured end of the market. I've probably, over the years, I've turned a lot more money over in the, say, $5, $6 to $20 range than I have in the last couple of years, simply because of the change in the landscape and how hard it is to turn money over in that section. So that was my most profitable area, and I have to cut that back and probably move into a darker, more dangerous area for me, the higher end of the market, and try and really perfect that part more. So I'm changing currently, and it's not really that comfortable for me at the moment, but it's hopefully I'll adapt to the new environment.
So take us through how you're trying to adapt. Are you trying to place more bets? Are you trying to turn more money over on the bets that you're already placing? What are some of the things you can do to try and adapt to the current marketplace? Because I'm sure others are going through a similar transition, and they might be looking at a lot of favourites in their sort of betting profile, and they might be thinking how they can adapt to, I guess, come up to speed with the current situation.
Well, it's probably just a number I pull out of my head, but say I would never bet under 5 to 2 before. I would use them in sort of multis and other ways to buffer in different bets. I would never bet outright in lower end of the market very often, and I basically have to place more emphasis on making sure that everything lines up to be able to bet into that end of the market. I've probably applied extra checks into how I do the form and come up with a final sort of figure on horses in that lower end to make sure that so I basically worked hard on making sure that my pricing in the lower end of the market has an edge over the market. Whereas before I was working on betting out of the market a bit more, you had more leeway. You could turn the money over, and I was finding it was profitable, so I wasn't too concerned about my pricing. But when you're really working in this lower end, and the percent, you can still get your value percentages, but you've just got to make sure that you're not marking the horses incorrectly. So I'm still perfecting that. I've probably always been a little bit harsh on favourites and always against them, and it was probably more a mental thing. And now I really have to move into that market, so I have to find a way to make sure that I'm more correct. Well, I am correct more often than I'm not. Basically, if it's it's just probably a harder filtration system at that end of the market than at the other end for me, and that's the main adaptation.
So, do you think that'll have an impact on the pointy end of the market as we sort of move into the spring and beyond? Because a lot more people are focusing there because they want to be able to increase their bets or increase the amount of money they're having on their bets, and that might shorten up the prices of those favoured runners because less people are focusing on the higher priced horses, or you think it'll come out in the wash?
I think it's having a huge effect on that pointy end of the market. We're seeing horses say I've got a horse that I've got confirmed that I think should be $1.90. Say it's $2.40 in early markets or something like that. That horse is because these minimum bet laws kick in at 9 o'clock on race day. That horse is usually well backed, and then back, say back 2 or 3 years ago, people probably wouldn't have tumbled in early. They're sort of forced into it now because they have to get something on that horse, and at the time that they're guaranteed at a fixed price, that horse is coming into say $1.70 or something crazy really quickly, and it's not getting back out because it is the horse that kind of everybody with a decent bank size and a bit of ability want to be on. And so you're taking a shorter price, I believe, about confirmed short price favourites or the shorter end of the market, and vice versa. The fake false favourites early at 9 o'clock in the morning are getting out to say $4 and $5 very quickly and not shortening back up. So I think that shorter end of the market is far more educated quickly, and it's just simply because of the processes and these automated betting algorithms that the corporates are running to shorten their prices and lengthen their prices so dramatically. But it just seems to be that short end on the horses that you can confirm have a lot in their favour on that particular day, shortening quickly and not getting back out, so they're harder to win on.
That's really interesting. In my mind, I actually haven't really heard anyone talk about 9 a.m. being a key moment in the day of the racing. In my mind, I'm thinking Boxing Day sales and everyone standing at the door ready to charge in.
That's 100% what it's like. That's it. It's just crazy.
Is that what it is? At 9:01 a.m., that's sort of a thriving marketplace, for want of a better term, just because everyone's trying to, I guess, take advantage of the current situation?
Yeah, so you've got I've got a dynamic odds or whatever, so any odds comparison website, and it's color coded to go red or green when the price is short or firm, and you don't have to be. I can be sitting here doing anything, and the screen above me will just start flashing it's like the trading markets have just opened. It just goes crazy, up and down, and the red and green starts flying everywhere on all markets. There's different people obviously waiting for different markets. And it's crazy what happens in that sort of half an hour to an hour from 9 to 10 a.m. every morning.
So you worked on the bookmaker side. What is the bookmaker thinking at that time? Because I would imagine only some of the really smart people who are thinking about it as in depth as you are and knowing that 9:01 a.m. is a good time to place a bet given the current environment. What are the bookmakers thinking at that time? Are they collecting all that information and using it, putting it in their vault for when the race comes up and getting ready to, I guess, act on 9:01 a.m. information as much as information that's 30 minutes before the race?
Well, the difference being, so when I was working there, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, and it wasn't as crazy, but we thrived on sort of someone, say, for argument's sake, a Dominic Byrne. If he was betting with us and he had a bet early, which he would never have had to do in those days, but if he did, as you say, you would run your book basically around his information, or I would know. I'd know clients pretty well. So say there was a Gay Waterhouse favourite and someone had an unusually large bet from the stable connected to it on this horse, you would sort of basically, if you agreed with it, you would run with it and really push your book forward as far as you could using that information. Nowadays, they want to handicap everyone and discourage people with a bit of ability or that win in the market, and they basically don't have many skilled people left that you would use the information to drive it forward. They more run their whole database like a poker machine. So say that you're a losing punter, they just play you. You can do whatever you like, basically, and they know they're going to beat you over time. Whereas me, they'll restrict me as much as possible. Saying that I'm a winning punter for argument's sake, they'll restrict me as much as possible and not even bother using my information. They'll just handicap me down to where I can't hurt them and their overall holds. Their automated algorithms will adjust pricing off my bet. So they'll use my information in that regard, and they'll push prices in on the horses that are fancied by people they deem smart, and then they'll just let the rest of the people bet however they like, and it's just a poker machine that runs around and round. They'll eventually beat the people who are losers over time, and we might chip away at them, but we can never hurt them because of the restrictions now that they're allowed to place on us.
Yep. Okay. So why hasn't there been a Pinnacle sports style racing bookmaker come out of the woodworks? Given all of the issues and given, I would imagine there's probably a lot of money left in the pockets because of the inability of a lot of people to get their bets down. What's holding that type of bookmaking operation back?
I think there's I think Centrebet had a go at trying to raise limits and things like that, but they also tightened up the threshold. I don't have an answer for that. See, someone's like I had someone smart, similar to someone have a go at me on Twitter not long ago saying well, why don't you become a bookmaker? The problem is that you need all of these, or mugs is a bad word, but we'll say, just average punters that are recreational punters. You need their money to fill on all, say you've got 15 runners in a race, you need to be laying all of those horses to be able to use your knowledge to drive forward on the horses that you like. So, it's to be able to have your book thrive and win, you need to be able to lay all runners. So companies like Sportsbet, Bet365, who have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising to bring in all these recreational punters into their system, you're never going to attract them away. So someone like me goes out, I could attract every smart punter to bet with me tomorrow, but I can't attract the recreational punter because I cannot possibly give them a product good enough to get them away because they're so well treated. If you're a losing punter, but as soon as you're a break square or a winning punter, you're cast aside. So they're the only ones looking for a new home, and they're not ideal for, a startup bookmaker. So the only one who could really take them on is someone that's established, like a Bet365 or Sportsbet. And to be honest, I don't know why they don't open up a bit more liberally, use the punters' information, the smarter punters' information, and really drive their books forward and nearly put the other companies out of business. I don't know why a big company hasn't taken that on board, but obviously they've got their reasons, and they're making enough money doing it the way they are. So I can't answer the question, but the problem for a startup company to come and do that, or a Pinnacle to sort of just come here and do it, they're not going to get the volume of recreational punters to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, it's an unusual topic that keeps coming up given the issues that are happening, especially for the professional end of the market, where they're unable to get sort of bets down or at the prices they want, or bets are pending and cancelled and all those sorts of things. So it's something that seems ripe, but I guess it's not as easy as it sounds, and it would take a fundamental change in the attitude of one of those big bookmakers or an incredibly smart operation to pop up and probably not spend too much money on advertising and focus more on sort of internal risk management and those types of things. But I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah, and finally, I remember having a bit of a conversation with Zeljko, a three-way conversation. He was dirty that he didn't come into corporate bookmaking, say 10 or 15 years ago, and use their information to drive a bookmaking business. Because say they had got hold of a database similar to Sportsbet did or Sporting Bet back in the day, and they did exactly what you said and just pushed forward but had the volume behind, they could have been the Goliath. And really it needs to be someone with that depth of information to be able to either use a bit of market intelligence and their own to really drive forward. And it's just not going to happen now, because it's just too big a back step, I would say, for someone like a Sportsbet or someone to, as you say, like put more worth on risk management and market intelligence than marketing, which is basically what they are now, just marketing poker machine based corporates, which is, that's each to their own, but that's how it's running.
So take me through your post-meeting analysis. I would say one of the main things that sort of separate the professionals from the recreational punters are the time spent on the post-meeting sort of evaluation and performance evaluation of betting, and not only betting, but the horses as well. Do you do that yourself? Is it a priority? Can you outsource it? Take us through some of the thought processes and tools that you use post a meeting.
I think anybody that works like I do, who I'm probably more of, I think that Paul Daly, who's been on your podcast before, sort of describes it as it's a mix of art and science, and I'm much more of an art than a science person. So I use his program to provide basically the science all the times that I would otherwise have to source myself, like when I was working for Zeljko's, like doing the pace and bias and setting meetings up and trying to work out what the actual times and sectionals were. I get that provided to me from a database, from Ratings to Win, and then I will apply my artistic part of it to go through every sort of replay of every race that I'll have anything to do with. So New South Wales racing, and apply all the techniques basically I've learned over the years, plus from Zeljko's, and mark every horse, check for biases myself, allow for any interference, any bad habits from the horses that I could improve, any bad habits I think will be detrimental to that horse moving forward, making notes in a database and using that going forward. So it probably takes an hour to two for each meeting. When it comes through from Paul's system that all the verified times and everything are in to work with, it'll take an hour or two probably for each meeting for post-race analysis.
So I want to talk about what in the stock market world would be inside information. You mentioned earlier about stable connected bets, which is completely fine, and obviously everyone's aware of those types of things. One thing I want to talk about is first starters. I always hear about first starters, and the argument comes up that owners should be able to get a bet on their horse at their first start for some reason. I don't know why it's so arbitrary and someone needs to get a bet on their horse at their first start, but from my perspective, it would be better if every horse had to have a public trial so there's more information out there, because everyone I've spoken to relies on the data and relies on the information, whether it's a small percentage or a large percentage of their operation, they are relying on that information. If the information is not there, they're not going to bet. And if they're not going to bet, then the volume and the liquidity in that market's going to be low, and that hamstrings the owner's ability to get a bet, because if they're betting a decent amount at a decent price, that's going to change the odds quite dramatically, and that's going to impact their ability to get a bet. So take us through your thoughts on the inside information with owners and being able to get a bet on and those type of things.
It's interesting the way you sort of put it, that it hampers so people want the to be able to hide their horse, but that hampers the ability for them to get on their own race. I've never thought of it like that, but I do believe that it doesn't really matter if your trainer's good enough and they're organised enough. You know, when you're talking about having to barrier trial, you don't have to show the horse's true ability in that trial. You just have to show that it's tractable and that it's ready to race, and basically has to get its ticket so that it's right to go to the races. So if your trainer's cunning enough to be able to conceal that horse's true ability just by giving it a quiet trial, obviously, and then it's up to the form student's eye to pick up that horse has. So I'm not saying they're doing anything untoward, no drugs or anything crazy involved. They're just letting the horse go around under its own steam. It's basically up to the punter to recognise that and then put a value on that horse when they go around in their first start. So I've got no problem with trainers having to trial publicly prior to their first race. I think that's fine. I do agree with that. The punters should be able to access that vision and for every horse before it has a race. When it comes to betting on their first start, I think it's probably more that people feel that if they are lucky enough to have a horse that has a bit of ability, or that they want to bet on their first start, they believe that they have the right to do that before anyone else. And that's a little bit silly in this day and age, only because everyone knows that everyone can see, hear everything. There's people at the racetrack, voice get around. It's just always going to get out these days. There's no such thing as the 100-1 into 2-1 winner on debut. It doesn't exist anymore. You know, it happens maybe once every 2 or 3 years at absolute best. It doesn't happen as a norm like it used to. The game's changed and people have to adapt to it. And like I have shares in plenty of horses myself, and I'm happy to. And like, obviously I like to bet, so I'm happy for everyone to have access to the same information I do of vision and trials. Obviously I'm going to have more knowledge of the horse and what it's doing in training and things like that. But I've got no issue with it, and I do think it drives turnover and is good for the game for everyone to have access to that information. And if your trainer has good enough ability to not show the horse up and prepare it through jump outs and other things, you know, that's a secret and a technique of a good trainer.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's the messaging, because obviously that happens in all sport, all racing, everywhere. You talk about, you know, it might be AFL, for example, the full forward suddenly starts full back and you switch it around. Things that can happen. It's just tactics, essentially. So it's sort of framed as somehow, not necessarily nefarious, but it's sort of seen as inside information, which is probably not the right word, but I think the messaging could be a little bit different. What about when it comes to, you know, stable hands and strappers and trainers and I guess also owners fall in that bucket? Information that's garnered through those, I guess, avenues. And you said you've worked in the stable environment and have been involved almost every aspect of the business. Does all that information now just get caught up in the market anyway? So therefore the edge or the slight edge is basically nil at that point? Do you think that's a fair assessment in the current wagering environment?
As in, like, they all sort of cut each other out? Like, there is no advantage from stable information? Is that what you're saying?
So, like, second preparation, Chris Waller, 3-year-old, who's had 2 starts, and it seems like now absolutely everyone knows about this horse, and there's no sort of secret that this horse is going to jump from its first preparation to its second preparation, and it's headed for the Golden Rose, and, you know, first up it's going to be, you know, flying. It seems like that information now is baked into the market price anyway. Is that sort of a decent assessment or not? Or is there still the ability to use, I guess, for want of a better term, inside information?
I think it is definitely baked into the early price. And then what you tend to find is, I tend to apply a rule that I've talked about before, that the bigger the stable, the more real the information, the that information is going to get back to a place like Betfair. So if there's an issue with a horse, or a horse has very strong ability, the bigger the stable, the more chance it is to get back to those exchanges late, just simply by the amount of mouths to feed, is kind of how I try and put it. That if you've got a stable with 50 people working in it, like staff, and then they're talking to one, it grows so quickly that, a horse that's in trouble might blow from $2.50 to $5. In a big stable, it might only blow from $2.50 to $3 in a small stable with the same information. So someone like Waller's, you tend to see that, if a horse of theirs is very weak on exchanges and in betting late, it seems to have be much more accurate than smaller moves from smaller stables. So I do think that it plays a big play in the marketplace still, though.
Is that perception, or is that because I'm sure that there's... So for that example you just mentioned, is that horse a legitimate $4 chance, or is it a $40 chance? And the fact that it's gone from $2.50 to $5 means, I would imagine in some cases it's a legitimate bet at $5. In other cases it should be 40 to 1, and it's not.
Well, so if that moves from a smaller stable in a place that's a lot more volatile, I would say from argument's sake, I want to back that horse and I've got it marked $3. I'll probably keep betting if it's a small stable in an area that I think I know more about this than, and I know that the market's so volatile that it could be just a syndicate or someone that's just got a set against something to do with this horse, whether it's position in run or jockey or trainer or something that is affecting the price. I'll probably keep betting. But if it's an exposed horse from a big stable in a Saturday race or something where there's a lot of people that have done the form in that market, yet the move's still radical, that price is probably, as you say, if it's $2 to 5 or 3 to 5, it probably should be 3 to 41. It's actually underplayed, and it's out of it's out of business. Basically, the horse. I'd say that in time you would do much better laying than backing those horses.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's something that I always think about, that it seems to be underplayed a little bit, and in my mind, because it's always said, "Oh, Betfair knows," or "Betfair, you should have seen it on Betfair in the last 30 seconds," but
yes,
just the way horse racing is. If there's 10 horses in a race and 3 or 4 of them are blowing late, then there's only one horse that can win. So, sort of just pure mathematics says that it's going to be much more. You're going to remember much more losers that blew late than winners, and it seems like, I don't know if that analysis can be conducted, but it seems like just in your mind, like, oh yeah, I backed it at $5. It was $7.80 on Betfair when they jumped, and I lost. Well, of course, it's going to happen much more than the one you remember that doesn't happen, just because only one horse can win the race. So it's always an interesting discussion.
I think it is an interesting discussion. I think you can only probably build your own assessments on what you can, and historical data. There's so much, like Betfair is so easy to go back and try and analyse. I think it's stable based. You've really got is the only way you can probably analyse it, because over time there can be so many different factors that causes horses to blow and firm late. And if you're probably jockeys are interesting, because it can be syndicates taking sets against jockeys and trainers. They're probably the two things that I would line up. What's causing the blow. And that's just trying to work that out yourself and then applying it to how much onus you place on whether it matters to you or not late in betting, or whether it causes you to bet up or not bet at all. It's whether you use it as a warning sign or as a thank you to keep betting and then increase it in price you're welcoming. So it's probably just a personal thing. You can do your own investigation into what you believe is causing those horses to blow and whether you're taking any notice or not.
Yeah, it is interesting. So what are your thoughts on a uniform body for racing in Australia? Do you think it's a worthwhile discussion, or do you think it's a flawed concept?
Well, as much as I'd love it to potentially happen, I think there's so many contributing factors into what drives all these different bodies within Australia, and the chances of them marrying up and having the same, like, agenda is probably a bad word, but they've all got people that they need to provide to, whether it be breeders, owners, punters. Everyone's got people that they need to keep happy, and they're not always going to they're always going to overlap. You're always going to step on other people's toes. Someone's always going to cop the raw end of the stick, and I don't understand how we're going to possibly get it into one national body. I'd probably love it to happen because it would solve, or it would be easier to solve so many issues that I or punters personally face if it was one national body, and it would be great for those decisions to only have to go through one set of hands. But I just think it's such a long shot to ever happen. I don't see how state governing bodies can possibly ever combine to be one. There may be a panel of sorts or a conference every year where we try and get decisions across the board put to one body, one federal body or something. I don't know how it can possibly happen, but I don't see one body governing racing any time in my life anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess we'll wait and see. I like to try and pick your brain and get a couple of tools for the everyday recreational punter to use. A few people in the past, I think Mark Lamborn mentioned SP is probably his best tool that he uses, or he even mentioned that horses sit outside the leader next start will be a decent bet because they're going to be pretty fit and they've had a good run prior. Do you have any tools, or essentially what's some of the biggest assets that you have as a punter that you can sort of give some insight to those who bet on the weekend and might be able to use and get a little bit more of an advantage on that day or on that race meeting? May not necessarily win long term or anything like that, but
yes,
better chance of a collect.
Well, interestingly, just to say on Mark Lamborn's thing, one of the first things I was ever taught from at Zeljko's is you can never give a negative mark to a horse that sits outside the leader, and that's because it's the hardest position in the race to race from. So whether that be outside the leader, 3 wide, no cover, 4 wide, no cover, you could never, ever give a negative mark to those horses simply because it's such a tough place to be. And that sort of ties into why Mark would say those sort of horses have a big advantage in them. So that's true. From my perspective, I believe that the best situation you can be to a punter is to find races with like an even to strong tempo and a fair track. So you want to identify tracks like bigger tracks where there's less bias and things come into play, and you want to find races that are going to be run at a true tempo, and that's when you can establish that the strongest horse should win that race. When you're sort of running into tracks with a lot of bias and slow tempos, small fields, basically it's all up to tactics and decisions made by jockeys and things like that, and it brings a lot of factors into play which are out of your control at the end of the day. You can try and predict them and price to your predictions, but you don't have control. Whereas the bigger the field, the more genuine tempo. If you can then try and identify the strongest horse, so say a horse that's won over that distance or more, the strongest form lines, they're going to win those races more often when faced with a genuine race with less variables from a track perspective and things like that. So if I was just to help punters in that sort of, they're the most predictable races to predict the outcome. And you do find you get a lot of value in those races too, which is, it sort of falls hand in hand. So for me, I try and find the race that's going to be run the most genuine, and then I try and identify the strongest horse in that race. And I tend to do that by, I want to find a horse that's won at that distance or further, or who genuinely has done things in its previous starts to say that it's going to be strong through the line, and they're the horses that are the most predictable over time to win out of. Horses that race on the pace again are going to be better again. So on pace and strong in a fast run race or a genuinely run race on a fair track, they're going to be your most profitable horses over time consistently. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, no, that does. It's really interesting because it seems like a theme when I do ask that question or something similar is finding scenarios where you can remove variance or remove variables essentially. And if that's a horse that's going to sit in the first couple of horses on a quick tempo and they're going to run it solidly and they've shown that they can run that distance out, it's going to be very hard for something behind it to run over the top in that scenario. So it seems like finding those predictable scenarios is the way to go, and then you can have a lot more confidence in your betting.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's all it is. Removing variables and and a horse that can do things that other horses in that race have shown they can't, it's basically your golden ticket.
So where do you sit on the Black Caviar Winx sort of discussions? Are you in the Winx camp?
Oh, funnily, I remember I was doing, I was working for a company doing a chat room sort of thing live during the day, and I remember when James McDonald won on Winx first up from a spell over about 1,300 metres at Rosehill in October in 2015, and I remember saying to the people in the chat room that it's the best horse I've ever seen, and getting just tearing shreds off me, saying, "Oh, this horse, that horse, other." And I just remember, like, I've never seen a horse like her that can sustain a sprint at such a high level off a fast tempo, slow tempo, sitting. It can do it consistently, and I'd have to say that as good as Black Caviar was, and obviously she's incredible, and it'd be tough to line them up, I'd back Winx to beat her, and even over like 1,400 metres, I definitely would. 1,200 metres, I still think she'd probably get her at her peak. I just think she's an incredible animal that can do something. I've never seen a horse like her in Australia in the time that I've been in racing, and Black Caviar was obviously highly talented and put horses away through her middle section of the race and had them destroyed by the time they got to the straight. But I really think that Winx would have kept coming at her. She's just an incredible animal.
Interesting. I guess maybe because I grew up in Melbourne, and maybe there's some bias there, and maybe you've got some recency bias, and there's a million other biases, but I just can't imagine any other horse being able to win over a short sprint distance as easily as Black Caviar did. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen again, but I guess we'll...
Well, she was cuddle. I wish... Yeah, she only ever had the one start at 1,400 metres in her life, and it's just hard to say that she would have even probably still been dominant over that distance, and she was, but... yeah, she was. They're such different horses, and Black Caviar was dominant from a 2-year-old. Even though when she was injured, she still won injured and came back and was dominant all the way through. Whereas Winx took her time to develop as a type and continues to improve. So they're so difficult to put alongside each other and compare. But they're both certainly extremely talented and exceptional animals that have kept racing going in Australia for mine over the last 10 to 15 years. They've just, between the two of them, the timing was so good for racing itself.
Absolutely. John, I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, do you want to just let the listeners know where they can find you if they want to reach out, probably on Twitter or the website?
Yeah, so on Twitter I think I'm John Walter. I'm not too difficult to find, and my website's racingwatch.com.au. I've just started that up and trying to make it sort of like a community where I try and keep everything, really as cheap as I can, and get people involved in a chat room and that sort of thing where they're like-minded people that can come and share their ideas and hopefully learn a few things. So that's the idea, and try and make racing a little bit more popular, hopefully.
And what about the videos you're doing with, I think, Paul, you're doing them together with the Punting Academy, is that right?
Yeah, so each week we're trying to just get people to email in questions similar to today and just go through them and answer them, and hopefully people can pick up little things along the way, and they might not agree with everything we do. And the beauty of Paul and I is we have such a different outlook on racing, and he's very data driven, and I'm the opposite probably. The more the artistic side of it. So we really do answer most questions from two extreme point of views. And I think over time it'll really strengthen up, and I'm really impressed by Paul's depth and his passion for racing, and obviously I'm pretty passionate too. So it comes off pretty well, I think, and it'll only get better over time with more questions, and I hope it's a positive thing. Obviously that goes up on YouTube too, at Punters Academy. So we'll continue that on and hope to do it for a long time yet.
Yeah, certainly. I suggest everyone jump on YouTube and have a look if they haven't already. John, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. All the best for the upcoming spring, and hope to do this again soon.
Thanks, mate, and thanks for all the people that you've done this with. It's really informative for everyone, and I hope it continues as well. It's great. Thank you.